Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Sorry I'm a little late today. I actually had a Pasadena police officer on my doorstep. Always good to talk to the Popo. I love the Pasadena Police Department, actually. They're very polite and very businesslike and nice. And I actually was explaining to the officer after we were done dealing with some business. He asked about the YouTube show. I told him I did Robservations, and he said, well, what's your show about today? And I said, well, it's about Jennifer Aniston saying that the MCU, that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is diminishing the film going experience. And he was like, what? I love the Marvel movies. I think everybody does. Anyway, once again, hello, imagination connoisseurs and members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is episode number 244 of Robservations, the show about something. So welcome. I hope you're having a good time today. I hope as we all wait for the where is the No Time to Die trailer? They released the poster. Where's the trailer? As anyone who knows me knows, I really would like to see the trailer for the new James Bond movie. It's not out yet. By the way, I have a fine cup of coffee. Anyway, why is it not out? I don't know. And I'm going to just jump into today's topic. First we had Martin Scorsese talking about how he's not a fan of the MCU and talking about how it's not real cinema. And now Jennifer Aniston has weighed in. I've got an article I'd like to read. Jennifer Aniston, of course, is starring in the upcoming Apple Plus TV show, The Morning Show, with Reese Witherspoon and Steve Carell. So she was out doing the rounds, and she was giving an interview to Empire Magazine. Now, if you guys don't know what Empire Magazine is probably the greatest film magazine currently being published in the English language. I don't know if there's better magazines in France or Japan. I don't know, because I can't read French or Japanese. But I've loved Empire Magazine for years. As a matter of fact, I will tell you, I was once in Empire Magazine. There's a picture of me in Empire Magazine, and the name of my autobiography, if I ever get around to writing one, I was at a party at the Cannes Film Festival in 1999 promoting Free Enterprise. I was playing in the film market there, and I was at a very snooty party up in the French countryside above Cannes. And beautiful house, giant pool surrounded by statues, like reproductions of David. Probably not, but it looked like that. Very boring. And I figured, okay, well, since we're here to market the movie, I figured I'd do a little early viral marketing. And I got up there, I hung off of a statue, and I said, hello, everyone. I am here to promote my film Free Enterprise, and all of you should come to the market screening tomorrow. And I dove into the pool. And someone took a picture of me in mid-dive going into the water. and it was in Empire Magazine in their Cannes coverage, and the caption was, and I love this so much, the caption said, another nameless director in a shameless act of self-promotion. Now, we had gone to Cannes with William Shatner, and the best thing is he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, what did you think of your director making a spectacle of himself and jumping into that swimming pool to promote the film? And Shatner said, well, what do you think about it? And he goes, well, I thought it was pretty great. And Shatner's like, I told him to do it. That's a true story. Anyway, so Jennifer Aniston in Empire Magazine. This was off Yahoo. I took this off Yahoo Movies. And Hannah Flint wrote it for Yahoo Movies UK today. And she says, Jennifer Aniston has joined the chorus of Hollywood figures denouncing Marvel movies. The actor, most famous for her role as Rachel Green in sitcom Friends, has said she's returned to the small screen because she is not, quote, that interested in living in a green screen. Aniston's movie career has mostly been dictated by romantic comedies of little acclaim, but she believes that Marvel movies are, quote, diminishing what's on offer for moviegoers. Quote, you're seeing what's available out here, and it's just diminishing in terms of its big Marvel movies, Aniston told Variety, or things I'm just not asked to do or really that interested in living in a green screen. I think We would so love to have the era of Meg Ryan come back. By the way, nobody would like that more than Meg Ryan. She added, I just think it would be nice to go into a movie theater, sit cozy. I think we should have a resurgence. Let's get the terms of endearment back out there. You know, Heaven Can Wait, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and The Goodbye Girl. Aniston's comments come after Martin Scorsese declared that Marvel movies were not cinema during an interview with Empire magazine. Oh, okay. So it was Martin Scorsese was being interviewed for Empire. I got it wrong. It was Jennifer Aniston being interviewed for Variety. And then Martin Scorsese famously said, I don't see them. The 76-year-old director said, I tried, but that's not cinema. Honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are, with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being. Well, that's usually because they're about superhumans, but that's just me. Aniston was speaking ahead of the premiere of her new Apple series, The Morning Show, in which she plays a veteran news anchor whose male colleague, portrayed by Steve Carell, is fired over sexual misconduct allegations. She's thrown into the spotlight while contending with the rise of a younger reporter played by Reese Witherspoon. The Morning Show will launch on Apple TV in the U.S. on the 1st of November, 2019. To quote the amazing Lucas, oh my goodness, I can't do it like him. But here's the funny thing. I'm just going to speak from my own perspective. My whole life, I dreamt of seeing giant superhero movies on the big screen. Now, when I was a kid in 1978, when I was 11, I got Superman the movie. And it was amazing. It was amazing. But it wasn't like superheroes battling each other. And in 81, yes, in 81 in the US, I know if you live in Australia, Superman 2 came out in 1980, but in the United States in 1981. In June of 81 was when Superman 2 came out here. It was Zod, Ursa, and Non battling Superman. Now, I really liked Superman 2, but it was goofy. The seams were showing even back then. And it was pretty cool, but after Superman 2 came out in 81, I think it was soon after I discovered comic books again. The direct sale market had started, meaning that no longer were comics just on spindle racks in, say, drugstores. There were now comic book stores in the United States, and there were more adult-oriented comics coming out from both Marvel and DC, and then later independent publishers, directly to comic book stores. And it gave rise to what was called the direct sale market. I had a paper route at the time. I delivered papers, and Robbie Cullen, the Cullens were on my paper route. Robbie Cullen was outside of his door one day, sitting on his porch, the stoop of his house. I rode my bike up. I dropped off the paper, and I said, Robbie, he was younger than me. I said, what are you reading? And he had Camelot 3000 number 4. And that was written by Mike Barr, and it was drawn by the amazing Brian Boland. And I looked at this comic, and it was also printed on Baxter paper. So it was not newsprint. It was white, heavy Baxter paper. And it blew my mind. I'm like, this is comic books now? So I lived in Seattle. I went down immediately, I had to finish my paper out. But the next day, I took the bus down to Golden Age Collectibles, which I believe is still even there today at the Pike Place Market. It was a collectibles store. It had comic books, and I was blown away. And I got sucked into the world of comic books. I was buying the 3 Marvel Baxter books that they were putting out were Khazar, Moon Knight, and Micronauts. And then DC was Vigilante and Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes. And then there was like Pacific Comics and First Comics. And I was hooked, man. I was hooked. Frank Miller did Ronin. It was a Baxter release. I mean, this was quality stuff. And so suddenly the comic book medium, all through the beginning of the 80s, and it carried us through the 80s, there was a comic book, specifically a superhero comic book renaissance. And the idea of what American superhero comics can be was greatly expanded. Now, Asia and Europe had long traditions of graphic storytelling where, you could buy manga in Japan about golf, they salary men. They had all kinds of different things there. But superheroes became much more mature, and everybody famously knows. Of course, you had Frank Miller writing Daredevil and Elektra and Bullseye and what happened there, and the X-Men and the Teen Titans were crossing over. You had Claremont writing the graphic novel God Loves, Man Kills, which was an X-Men graphic novel, still one of the great X-Men stories. And then we had, of course, Dark Knight. You had Crisis on Infinite Earths. Comic books really started to flourish, and it was amazing. But all through that time, I'm like, man, I was going every week. Sometimes I was buying like 30 books a week. I was obsessed. I was buying so many different things, and also other comics that weren't superhero related, like Howard Chaykin's American Flag, which was one of my favorite. To this day, it's still one of my favorite comics of all time. Amazing, amazing stuff. And I just was like, man, if they could ever make a movie like this. And what's interesting is in '87, when RoboCop came out, RoboCop felt like an '80s comic book. It had kind of the violence in it. It had the satire in it. And I believe, if memory serves, Howard Chaykin is actually thanked in the special thanks of RoboCop because those media breaks were very similar to the American Flag comic book. So I've always wanted to see big budget comic book films, Marvel, DC, and again, '89, we got Tim Burton's Batman. '94, we got The Crow, based on J.O. Barr's comic, which I thought to this day, The Crow is one of my favorite comic adaptations. We, of course, got Blade in the late '90s, and then everything changed when Bryan Singer made X-Men in 2000. Opens with a scene in Auschwitz. I mean, it changed comic books, Raimi Spider-Man movies, and then we were off to the races, and comic book films are where they are now. So here's the thing. If you were never somebody that paid any attention to comic books growing up, and a lot of people in America didn't, comic books for the most of their existence were dismissed by people. Nobody took them seriously. They certainly weren't taken seriously as literature. But when Watchmen rolled around in '86, I'm like, this is as good. The Watchmen comic was, even though it was a reflection of the entire comic book medium, but also as a thriller, as a mystery, as a science fiction story, and as a superhero story, I thought it was one of the greatest things, not just that I had read in the comics medium, but that I had ever read. And I understood even the end of the comic book, how it was a bit of a riff on the Architects of Fear. But again, to me, it harked back to Adrian Veidt's plan was, if the lie is big enough, people will believe it, which was, National Socialism, and it was Hitler. And I loved Watchmen. I've probably read it 50 times. I've even got this NECA Watchmen. Normally it's got pens in it or something, but comic books, I was hooked, and I read them pretty religiously all the way up through most of the aughts. And I sort of stopped buying comic books on a regular basis, 2008, 2009, probably the subprime mortgage crisis, because money and it got repetitive. Reading comic books from the early '80s to 2008, 2009, everything was cyclical. There's only so many stories you can tell, really. And it was always variations on a theme. And I just got, especially after Neil Gaiman's Sandman ended its 75-issue run, I wanted to quit then. I'm like, this is my favorite comic book of all time. I didn't. So anyway, here we are now in 2019. We've had 23 movies in the Infinity Saga. We got Black Widow coming out. We got the Eternals coming out. And we have Joker now, ironically, the least comic book movie that's ever been made, a movie that transcends the comic book genre. There isn't a shred of the fantastical in Joker. And I think for the first time, a comic book film, all comic book movies have had a twinge of the fantastical, the science fictional, the horror, whatever you want to call it. Elements of horror, science fiction, fantasy have always been part of the comic book genre. Joker has none of that. There's he has no weird gadgets yet. He's got no exploding flower with acid. He's got nothing. If you took out the name Joker and just called it Arthur, and it was about a mentally ill man's descent into madness, people would look at it and, oh my God, what an incredible film. But both of what Jennifer Aniston and Martin Scorsese are saying, I understand. Because what they're really talking about is not necessarily the MCU, I don't think. That's just the easy and dare I say it, lazy target. Because what's happened is movie going has changed. And why it's changed, we've talked about this a lot ad infinitum. The mid-range adult-oriented fare, like a When Harry Met Sally, which is a film that would become a zeitgeist movie. Everybody would have to see it. Obviously, when Sally Albright fakes an orgasm in the middle of a delicatessen, I'll have what she's having, Rob Reiner's mom, that became a water cooler moment. Everybody talked about that moment. Everybody went and saw When Harry Met Sally. When Harry Met Sally, by the way, one of my favorite comedies of all time, certainly one of my favorite comedies of the 80s. But here's the thing. If that movie were to come out today, movie audiences wouldn't go see it. It wouldn't even register a blip on the pop culture zeitgeist radar, because movie going has changed. And why has it changed? It's changed because television and now streaming services, cable television, has become the place where these kinds of stories are now being told. Now, I grew up loving movies. I've loved movies my whole life. I've wanted to make movies my whole life. And I'm not going to lie, even working on movies like Tango Shalom or the Lifetime movie I edited, I Know Where Lizzie Is, or the Paradox, the low-budget science fiction film I cut before that. Working on those movies, you always had a dream. Paradox opened at a little theater in Hollywood. It did get some theatrical play, and I did go see it. And it was a better experience. I think all stories, when you can see them on a big screen, are better. They're larger than life. That's how they were meant. That's how the movies were designed to be that way. And when television came in the late 40s and early 50s and started to provide an alternative, by definition, it was a much smaller image and it was a much less defined image because of the technology. But now we have beautiful high-def images. You've got 4K televisions, which is basically people see in 4K, getting bigger and bigger all the time. If you have a projector, you can literally duplicate the theatrical movie-going experience at home. I've been in million-dollar home theaters here in Hollywood that are indistinguishable from smaller theaters. Now, yes, do you get an IMAX experience at home? No, but that's coming. The IMAX Corporation is going to be making home theaters, and it is coming. But here's the thing. Because of that, because of what we all now have at home and the rising costs of motion pictures, what people are paying to go to see at the theaters is different. If you're not going to see a Disney family epic like a Pixar movie or a movie like Frozen or the upcoming Frozen 2, those are family outings, or these big effects-driven extravaganzas like your Marvel Cinematic Universe. The great thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is when Martin Scorsese was making Taxi Driver, the technology did not exist to make an Avengers movie. You could never have made... I went back and watched The Rocketeer. Elizabeth had never seen The Rocketeer, which is another great comic book adaptation of Dave Stevens' comic. Obviously, it's a little bit more PG-13, a little less Betty Page and a little more wholesomeness put in, but Billy Campbell's one of his basically, I think, big screen debut. He'd been on TV, and of course, Jennifer Connelly, one of the most beautiful Jennifers to ever appear in films. Alan Arkin, wonderful comic book adaptation, made in 1990. When I showed Elizabeth, ILM did the effects. You look at it now, and it's like, wow, those effects of the Rocketeer flying they're good, but they're quaint. And that was a film made in 1990. They didn't have the technology then to make an Avengers movie. So now, as technology has increased and the ability to provide spectacle is part of what we get in the movie theaters, we are getting cinematic visions of superheroes that I dreamt of as a young kid that only now, or in the last 20 years, have been possible. I mean, you go back and you watch the first X-Men movie that was budgetarily challenged. It was a movie that was made for $75 million. The effects, they hold up, but they're a little like, you look at them, you're like, oh, okay. And that was 19 years ago. And even the evolution of visual effects within the X-Men franchise. And the idea that somehow Marvel movies are ruining Hollywood. I mean, even if they release 3 movies a year, there's 52 weeks in a year. Now, I understand those movies are sucking up theaters and all of that, but It's not the Marvel movies that have prevented the When Harry Met Sally's from being in movie theaters. No, it is the reality of the business, which is now being thought of on a global scale. And the fact is, comedy's never traveled well internationally, but now when you're making movies, the costs of making movies have skyrocketed. So, and the costs of marketing movies have skyrocketed. So the reality of going to a movie theater and seeing a movie like When Harry Met Sally is no longer realistic. First of all, who's gonna run out and go see When Harry Met Sally? It's like, why not wait for streaming? If you've got a 65-inch or a 77-inch or whatever, how big your big TV is, and it's a 4K TV, and you know you're going to get it in a couple of months on Netflix, or you're going to get it on Amazon or Apple Plus or Disney Plus. If you're going to get it, are you going to leave the house, pay as much money as it costs, buy your refreshments, and go see the film when really is the experience of seeing When Harry Met Sally much different in a theater than at home? Now, I'm an iconoclast, and I would say yes, everything is better in the movie theaters. Everything is better in the movie theaters. But I'll tell you something. I know when I watch a movie at home, I've optimized my system. I get the best picture. I can have thunderous sound. And my home theater is actually in my bedroom, in our bedroom. So I can sit in my bed and watch films optimally presented. You know, I could watch Infinity War and Endgame in 3D if I want, and it looks terrific. And I have a lot of other 3D movies too. So the movie-going experience has changed. And I think as much as I love Martin Scorsese, and I've always loved Jennifer Aniston, I think she's actually a very gifted performer who should be a movie star but isn't. I can get into that in a different show. But I've always liked Jennifer Aniston. And I think what she's saying is she's missing the kinds of movies that she loves. That she, not only is she in them, but look, I love When Harry Met Sally. But I have When Harry Met Sally. I own it. I have a Blu-ray of it. What I didn't have in 1987 or 88, I don't remember the exact when Harry Met Sally came out. You know what I didn't have in the late 80s? I didn't have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It couldn't exist. Couldn't exist back then. Now I have it. Now I've got a photorealistic Thanos that I can't believe how good he looks. You know, the scale is correct. A photorealistic Thanos fighting Hulk in an Asgardian spaceship. I mean, if you were to ask me, we live in a world, or as Mako said in Conan, in an age of wonder, and then Basil Polidoris' score rises up. I mean, we're getting things that could not have existed back then. Now, you know, I watched Always Be My Maybe. That was a pretty nice little romantic comedy with a great funny turn by Keanu Reeves. That was on Netflix. I watched it. Now, am I saying it's exactly equal to When Harry Met Sally? No, it's not. But they're out there. There's all kinds of movies that are being made. Booksmart, as we've talked about on the John Campea show. Wonderful movie. The Farewell with Awkwafina. Terrific little film. Did people go see it in the theater? No, it's an art house movie. It's basically making a pit stop in the theater before it finds its way to streaming, just like Jennifer Aniston's new TV show. This is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. It's just different. The movie-going experience, by definition, has gotten bigger, bolder, brasher. When you're going to go out to the theater, I mean, look at what happens. Thursday night previews. Those didn't exist 10 years ago. That's something new. This kind of excitement that we have for these movies. I love the fact, I mean, I can't wait. I love buying advance tickets, whether it's whatever's playing at the Cinerama Dome. I love going to the Cinerama Dome. I love going to the ArcLight. I love going to the bar and then sitting down and getting some food. They actually have really good food at the ArcLight. I love getting their bolognese with Kobe beef and whatever specialized cocktail they've made for whatever movie's opening. And everybody's there. It's all fans. You know, it's all people. It's all imagination connoisseurs. And you go in, you see that movie. It's a total event. People are happy to be there. It's truly an experience. And this is on a Thursday night. That's an experience that didn't happen 10 years ago. So that's neat. If you're interested in comic book movies, as I am, and I've got 23 Marvel movies since 2008, I'm like a pig in shit, frankly. You know what I'm saying? Because I watched all kinds of rom-coms. I love movies like His Girl Friday. I talk about the fact that two of my favorite movies are Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve. I still watch Double Indemnity, great film noir, modern film noir like Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. All of those movies still exist. We're just going through a period of time where movies have changed. We're getting El Camino tonight at midnight, the Breaking Bad film. There's all kinds of greatness happening all around us. It's just the landscape has changed. We didn't have streaming services. I mean, when I was working on Star Trek The Next Generation, everybody thought, oh my God, I was looking at the restorations of the episodes when they would come in. I remember seeing Encounter at Farpoint for the first time. I was like, oh my, I mean, the difference between the original NTSC version of Star Trek The Next Generation and the HD, the 2K versions, is so extreme if you know what you're looking for. Like, I almost wept the first time we got to look at, I looked at the uncompressed, I think it's like 90 gigs. I might still have it on a hard drive. The uncompressed files of Next Generation, watching them when they first came in, it was astonishing. No one bought them. I mean, people bought the first season, but I think it was season 6 only sold 5,000 copies worldwide. One of the greatest television restorations, if not the greatest in the entire history of the medium, and people weren't buying it. Why weren't they buying it? Well, one, they bought it a lot already. But two, everyone had streaming services. Streaming services were up on the rise as Star Trek was being put out in HD, both Next Generation and Enterprise, that we busted our humps making the documentaries for, me and Roger Lay Jr. or Roger Lay Jr. and I. It was tough. And I was like, oh, the world has changed. I feel it in the water. Galadriel was right. And the beginning of Lord of the Rings echoed in my head because we were going into a different world. And I'll tell you something. There's more content. There's more interesting things being made now. I wouldn't say than ever, but the quality and the kind of things that were getting made, adaptations of science fiction novels like The Expanse, writ large on your streaming service. But I mean, we're still getting these things. It's amazing. We're getting so many great things. And I would dare say, I'm sure Jennifer Aniston's new show is probably pretty excellent. And Reese Witherspoon coming from Big Little Lies, and now she's going to be becoming a producer in her own right. Reese Witherspoon had some amazing, I love Election. I adore Election. I love Cruel Intentions, and I love Legally Blonde. Those are 3 Reese Witherspoon films that I love. By the way, I own them all, just so you know. I own them all. They're great. Would those get made today in the theaters? No. First of all, Reese Witherspoon's a little older now, but what has she done? She has moved over to streaming because there's no entertainment now is entertainment. And as home theaters get bigger and it gets more expensive to go to the movies, we're going to go to the movies for spectacle. And wait, in 25 years, people are going to be, remember movies before they had virtual reality? It's all changing. We're in a changing landscape. Films have always been technologically based. It started out technologically based. It's still technologically based. And eventually, movies will become supplanted by virtual reality storytelling. I know people are like, no, that's not true. Nope, your traditional dramas will. As soon as you can be a participant in the story, you will be. And that's going to happen. So anyway, when I hear people like Jennifer Aniston and Martin Scorsese, who I love, bitching about this, I just think, you know what, man? The world is just different. It's just a different world. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different. And that's okay. That's okay. What's important is we are getting great stuff. Great stuff. Anyway, I'll jump into the chats, see what people have to say. JB Bonifacio is here. Rachel, Marvel is not diminishing movie going. Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon is. Again, JB, I don't think so. I think Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon are giving us great stuff. We're getting great shows. And I'll tell you, the garbage shows are not going to continue. What's amazing is there's no longer an arms race. I mean, people are talking about the streaming wars. Do you know who wins? It's us, because the viewers, they're upping. Look, just look at Dark Crystal and Carnival Row. I mean, a lot of people can't get past the puppets, but 2 amazing fantasy shows. Do I think Carnival Row is perfect? No. Do I think it kind of meanders and there's certain plot lines that are picked up and shouldn't be? Yes. But for the most part, I mean, you got Renee Echevarria and you have Travis Beacham making that. Renee Echevarria, another person that got their start in working on Star Trek: The Next Generation. The pedigree of what Ron Moore, Brandon Braga, Naren Shankar, who's over on The Expanse, and and Renee, it's incredible. It's incredible. And we're in an embarrassment of riches. And I'll tell you, Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon are providing and will continue to provide some amazing stuff. HBO, His Dark Materials. I mean, The Golden Compass, that didn't work out so well. Now we're getting Philip Pullman's entire series done. Unbelievable. As much as I hate Damon Lindelof's, I hate watched The Leftovers. I'm still excited for Watchmen. I hope it's going to be good. I really do. But we're getting some amazing stuff. We should be happy. And I'm not saying you just have to, whatever they shovel out, you should eat it. No, but for the most part, there is a healthy competition going on. The level of product that we are getting is extraordinary. Who would have thought that somebody would have shot a Breaking Bad movie in secret? Well, we're going to find out tonight how good it is. Jet Screamer says Starfleet would never allow tribal experiments. Okay, since you brought it up, I will say this. They had a very clever ad, an image to promote this new short trek. And it was a recreation of a classic Pocket Books cover. They gave this short trek. I tweeted about it. I was like, this is wittier and shows more understanding of the Star Trek franchise, this one image, and the way they've created an old Pocket Books Star Trek novel from the early 80s. This shows more understanding of the Star Trek franchise than anything I've seen in Star Trek Discovery. And I know a lot of people, not Terry, our moderator, different Terry, bitched and moaned that I was complaining about Discovery again. So I'm not going to make this about bashing Discovery, but really they went back and they're doing a tribble show. They have to go back and do that. I guess so. Why don't they do something new? Anyway, yeah, tribble experiments, they wouldn't. Alan Sachs says, are they saying Marvel is bad cinema or not cinema? Well, Martin Scorsese said it isn't cinema. And I get where he's coming from. I mean, Martin Scorsese, as I've always said, that great storytelling is about sharing human truths through the greatest medium of all, storytelling. We're trying to convey the great human truths with storytelling. And I understand. And when you grow up on a steady diet of whether you're watching Truffaut or Antonioni or Ozu or Kurosawa or Bergman, the great makers that were dealing with the human condition, and they were making these very introspective, thoughtful movies about daily life. What was it like to grow up in France? If you're going to watch The 400 Blows or something at the time, or I get it. Those movies are very much set in the real world, and they're very much talking about the human condition. Now, I get it. Look, I'm the first person to say I get a lot out about the human condition through horror films, through science fiction films, and fantasy movies. But you only get it in a certain way. Just like with genre fiction. I love genre movies. I love science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But there's a lot of people that tune out because flights of fancy, when something isn't real, or sometimes there's a lot of people that tune out. That's why, for the most part, now we are all living in the post-geek singularity where science fiction, fantasy, and horror has become the norm. But for a long time, it wasn't. For a long time, it was looked down upon as somehow lesser fiction. And that's changed. That's why we live in the post-geek singularity community. Martin Scorsese is not a guy who believes in the cinema of superheroes. He just doesn't. And he might come around. That's why I can't wait to hear what he thinks of Joker. And as superheroes take on the real world more and more, I think that perception in people like Martin Scorsese is going to change. Although I would imagine Martin Scorsese watches Joker and goes, yeah, I did that back in the 70s with Taxi Driver, and then in the early 80s with his other film, and I with King of Comedy, his other film, and with King of Comedy, Rupert Pupkin and all that. I get it. He's going to look at it and go, yeah, I did that 40 years ago. But nobody has done that in the comic book movie realm. And it's all going to change. And it's like Luke going into the cave in Empire Strikes Back. Only what you take with you. And if you're going to decide that comic book movies, by the way, comic book movies are a marvel of movie making, because it's not so much an auteurist vision, because you have a lot of people collaborating. It's truly the result of collaboration. Sure, you need to have strong directors and you need to have strong vision, but I mean, it's a marvel of pre-visualization and visual effects and all those things. I mean, I don't think Martin Scorsese ever really used a lot of pre-visualization or visual effects, except when he was doing things that required them, whether it was The Aviator or Hugo. I mean, I don't know if he worked with a lot of storyboards when he was making Goodfellas. I don't know. But maybe he did. But I don't think that Martin Scorsese was using a lot of visual effects in his early films, because they weren't about that. They were about people in the streets and what was going on. So I don't think, Alan, that it's not that it's bad cinema. It's just cinema that if you are not open-minded enough to think that you might get something out of a superhero story. See, I see superhero stories as another example of Westerns, war movies, cop thrillers, lawyer movies, legal thrillers like that. I mean, they're just a different form of it, in a different, with combined with, I mean, what are superheroes if not cops? Now, I think one day somebody's going to make the superhero version of Serpico. I mean, I'd love to see that. Maybe that's what we're getting with Watchmen. I don't know. But it's all genre cinema. I mean, Martin Scorsese should know better than to have said what he said, because he loves genre cinema. I get it. He just, Gilbert, there's no craziness going to happen today. Gilbert, Elizabeth has clients. It's okay. You don't have to bark. Gilbert's just being protective. Right, buddy?
That's right, buddy. I know.
Oh, dude. Come on, dude. Is it cookie time? I think it's cookie time. Cookie time for Gilbert. Okay, I know Toulou's always very polite. She just comes and she sits. What about you, Gilly? Have one. There you go, bud. I know one is never enough. They're like Lay's potato chips for these kids. You get two, though, this time. You're not going to take that. And here you have one, Gilbert. So I know people are like, I'm a sucker. Sucker was born every minute. These dogs are P.T. Barnum, and I'm the sucker. Willow Yang says, you're predicting that The Irishman will win Best Picture, but do you think the fact that it's a Netflix film will turn off some of the voters? You know what? I do. I think that right now we're going through an evolutionary period of time where they're trying to figure out streaming, and Netflix has not exactly played ball. There is in no way, shape, or form anywhere in Netflix's strategy that says they have to theatrically release motion pictures. They only are doing it for a few. They're only ever going to do it for a few things. I know that El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, is getting a theatrical release, limited. Most people aren't going to go. I'm going to see The Irishman in the theater, because it's made by not just one of our great directors today, but one of the great filmmakers of all time, Martin Scorsese. Nobody knows how to move the camera like him. I mean, with the exception of perhaps Steven Spielberg, the virtuosity of movie making that both of those men bring to the screen demands to be seen as writ large. You really have to see it big. But I do think because of that, The Irishman, it is Martin Scorsese. It is a 3.5-hour epic. We haven't seen an epic like this. I don't think I've seen a 3.5-hour movie in the theater first run. I mean, what was Gandhi 3.5 hours? And that won Best Picture. I do think it's going to win Best Picture. Now, anyway, guys, I have an enormous amount of letters. I'm just gonna start in. And speaking of Willow Yang, you know what? Willow Yang just never disappoints me. I wish I met her in my younger days. I do. Here's Willow Yang, ladies and gentlemen. Get this. And by the way, this is the first letter. This is the bottom of the letters. So I'm starting with Willow Yang. I got so many good letters from people. A lot of my old stalwarts, many of you people who've become regular letter writers, you've sent it. There's such goodness here because I wasn't online yesterday. Anyway, let me just jump into it. Guess what Willow Yang has sent a letter about? Oh, I'm going to tell you. One of my favorite episodes of Next Generation, second season's The Measure of a Man. I don't know if she watched the extended version. It's the only extended version of a Star Trek episode that's 13 minutes longer, with Riker and Picard famously fencing. But here it goes. Greetings, Rob. I'm writing my analysis for what is probably the most acclaimed episode from the first two seasons of The Next Generation, Measure of a Man. What has really impressed me about the episode is its sheer simplicity. In a universe of spaceships and numerous factions of extraterrestrial life, some of the most intense battles aren't being fought with phasers and photon torpedoes, but with words. Please, please tell that to the Discovery writing staff. Measure of a Man is, in essence, a courtroom drama, centered around a gripping philosophical debate and bolstered by some stellar performances, most notably from Sir Patrick Stewart, who is always at his best whenever he has to deliver a rousing speech. My primary issue with Measure of Man is that I feel the trial over Data's personhood seems to be taking place much too late. I cannot imagine Starfleet, as diverse and open-minded as they might be, admitting a box on wheels into their academy. I think that the issue should have been raised and addressed prior to Data's joining of Starfleet. The other criticism I have is that I would have preferred to see the actual court battle take place between Maddox and Picard. Riker feels a little like he has been shoehorned into the story. He isn't an expert on artificial intelligence, and there is an obvious conflict of interest in his role representing the plaintiff. Maddox could have probably offered a more persuasive argument, both from the philosophical perspective of using data for the benefit of the majority and from the scientific perspective of what constitutes actual sentience. Even though the episode presented Picard as the underdog in the debate, I actually found Riker's arguments to be a little weak upon further consideration. I thought that he catered more towards our innate prejudices, our instinct to fear, reject, and diminish those that are different from us. The evidence that he presents against Data's personhood are primarily superficial. Data's superior strength, his non-organic body, the fact that he can be switched off by the push of a button. He does not, however, make a compelling argument to refute Data's sentience, which I think is the more important matter. Picard's arguments appealed more to our intellect. We are urged to look beyond outward appearance, to open our minds and overcome our preconceptions of what we think a person is. Once physical differences are made moot, the only issue then becomes whether or not Data is sentient. As Picard points out, Data exhibits sentimentality and attachment. He has experienced friendship and intimacy. He fits the criteria for Maddox's definition of sentience. In the light of such evidence, it becomes difficult to objectively dismiss Data as simply a toaster. I don't know if Measure of Man is directly metaphorical of civil rights movements, but it does certainly evoke memories of landmark court cases in our own world that has recognized the liberties and rights of various peoples who've been oppressed. Maddox wishes to study Data in order to replicate him, to create an entire army of androids to serve other crew members. But as Guinan suggested to Picard, if androids are life forms, then such an act would amount to slavery. Even though Maddox appears to believe that he is doing things for the greater good, is it justifiable to violate the rights of a few for the benefit of the many? As someone once stated, a civilization is measured by how it treats its weakest members. Throughout our own history, societies have often had narrow definitions of what constitutes as a person, to some extremely horrendous and shameful effects. The Federation might have advanced beyond us in its recognition of the sanctity and rights of organic life forms, but they are now finding their values being tested with this new challenge. Picard sums the stakes up perfectly in his wonderfully delivered closing statement. The decision you reach here today will determine how we will regard this creation of our genius. It will reveal the kind of people we are, what he is destined to be. It will reach far beyond this courtroom and this one android. It could significantly redefine the boundaries of personal liberty and freedom, expanding them for some, savagely curtailing them for others. Are you prepared to condemn him and all who come after him to servitude and slavery? Gosh, I really hope the writers of the Star Trek Picard series have watched Measure of a Man and remember this speech, because it looks like it should come into play in the new series. On the science fiction side of things, the exploration of artificial intelligence and what constitutes as a person is a fascinating subject that has become increasingly relevant with our continued advancements in technology. Some examples that immediately come to my mind include Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and of course its movie adaptation Blade Runner, Alex Garland's Ex Machina, and the latest television series adaptation of Westworld. The scene where Riker detached Data's arm feels reminiscent of a scene in Westworld where one of the visitors cut open Dolores, revealing her mechanical internals as a means of demonstrating that she is just a machine. Funnily enough, while watching the episode, I was actually reminded of a question that I encountered on a first-year biology quiz. We were presented with a hypothetical group of robots that fit most of the biological criteria for life, and we were asked to argue for or against the classification of these robots as living organisms. At the time, I had argued that the robots were non-living because they weren't cellular. But reflecting back on the matter now, I don't know if I necessarily think that anymore. What were the first life forms on Earth but genetic entities, chains of self-replicating carbons and other elements that bore little semblance to the complex organisms that we know today? Are we limiting ourselves with our prejudices, with our narrow preconceived notions of what life should look like? A final point that I would like to discuss in this debate over artificial intelligence, and something that was briefly brought up in Measure of a Man, is the question of whether a machine can have a soul. Personally, I'm inclined to reject such theological arguments. In his paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Alan Turing pointed out that it is still uncertain whether humans do, in fact, have souls themselves. Unless we can demonstrably show that we do, I don't believe that we should be putting the onus onto other life forms, organic or artificial, to prove that they have souls. Perhaps we are just well put together bags of reacting chemicals, no more remarkable than a well put together group of circuits. Perhaps we are more. As Philippa Louvois, that's her name, as Philippa Louvois states, it is a question that is for us to each individually explore. Best regards, Willow. That's why we gave her own section on the Burnettwork, Willow Talk. What a great review of Measure of Man. Thank you very much for that, Willow Yang. What it would be like, again, every time I read one of her letters, I'm like, I want to go out and get really wasted with Willow Yang just to talk to her. Chris Bravado says, by the way, when and if you read my letter, I did forget to applaud all the work of the CG done during Star Trek Discovery's elevator scene with depth and imagination. Go Hawks. All for naught, though. Pretty fly for a Filipino guy says, let's appreciate the abundance, film fans from repressive countries. Let's appreciate the abundance film fans from regressive countries yearn for our woes. Keep spreading the cinematic gospel. Rob rocks. You know, I agree with that. We take it for such granted that we have at our fingertips everything we could want. But a lot of people don't. That is so pretty fly for a Filipino guy. Well done, sir. Echo Base Network says, can you tweet or send me or tell me the Star Destroyer kit and fiber optic kit that you're going to build? I think I may do it as well. Well, first of all, the Star Destroyer model I have is an unlicensed model made by a guy named Randy Cooper. And if you're a pretty experienced modeler, Randy Cooper, and by the way, from the time I purchased that Star Destroyer kit, I must have bought it from him 5 years ago. He makes them out of resin. They're garage kits. The guy, it's a rabbit hole. I also have his kit of a classic shuttlecraft from Star Trek and a Blade Runner spinner. And these are resin garage kits. They require quite some skill to make, but I think the model is like 3 feet long. I think it's a 3 foot long model. I'm going to have to, there's a brand new Bandai 1/5000th scale Star Destroyer kit. It's not nearly as big, but you can buy that with a fiber optic kit. But when you're building a 3 foot Star Destroyer model, you have to do all the drilling and you have to put it in all yourself. But that Bandai kit that's brand new, you could go to culttvman.com, go to their hobby store and order stuff. And Steve Iverson, who runs Cult TV Man, if you go there and buy, Cult TV Man's awesome. If you want Starship models of any kind or models of monsters or anything, the places that I go are Cult TV Man and, of course, Monsters in Motion. Both of those stores are incredible stores to go to. And please tell Steve Iverson, if you go there, that I sent you. I don't think those companies have enough to sponsor this channel in any way, shape, or form, but I certainly sponsor them. But yeah, that new Star Destroyer model's bitching. But just look up Randy Cooper models, and amazing. Or there's other crazy garage kit manufacturers. Garage kits are model kits that are unlicensed, and they're made by people that just love models, because no one's going to license. No one's going to go, I think I'm going to get rich manufacturing a model kit of this. Starship models in particular, there's a lot of garage kit makers that make these kits on their own. Now they're getting 3D printed. And there's some amazing, like there's a guy on Shapeways. You can buy the Cygnus from the black hole. It's about this big. and you just buy it section by section. Jeff Bond, my buddy Jeff Bond. Also, look up if you want to see my friend Jeff Bond, who's written a number of books. He's literally built hundreds of Starship models, and they're in his garage. And he's known as the Lazy Modeler. I don't know if he's on Instagram or Pinterest or wherever he's got his. Look up the Lazy Modeler. You will salivate. I usually wet myself whenever he has a party and his birthday's coming up. Love going to his birthday in November because you're going to his garage every year and you see, what have you built in the last year? He's always building something. He built a model of the Valley Forge from Silent Running that he shipped to Spain that was in a museum in Spain. It's incredible. Sorry, everybody's going, what are you talking about? I know. Phil Wen is here. Finally watched John Carter and Color Me Surprised. It's a damn good movie from beginning to end. The cast, the overall SFX, and story were all great. Well, Phil, you know what? Joe Blow, because I scour YouTube every day and watch stuff, Joe Blow did a great appreciation video for John Carter. I love John Carter. You know what I think? Bob Iger killed it, so George Lucas would have no reason not to sell him Star Wars. Just my theory. Willow Yang says, did you watch The Next Generation as the episodes were coming out on air? How did you react to the cliffhanger at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 1? First of all, yes, Willow Yang. It was religious. I mean, I've told the story before. I don't know if I'll tell it again. I was so deliriously excited about Star Trek The Next Generation. As a matter of fact, I hosted the Washington State premiere at the Evergreen State College. I had a friend of mine, because it was syndicated. It didn't air every day it didn't air the same day in every market because it was a syndicated show. I actually got water and coffee. And yes, the end of Best of Both Worlds, because people forget, while Star Trek The Next Generation seasons 1 and 2 were not great, people still watched it. It was still a big hit. By season 3, though, even the naysayers, the Trek fans, came to the show, and people went bananas. It was an incredible ending. People couldn't believe it. It was jaw-dropping. I mean, remember, when the show first came out, there had been one Borg episode, and it was mostly known for being a Q episode. So the Borg were coming, even though at the end of the first season, at the end of the neutral zone, they allude to the fact that there is Borg activity. But we don't really know what it is yet because it's undefined. And when Q-Who came out, Maurice Hurley was the man who created the Borg. It was a big deal, but it was still a Q-centric episode. And we knew the Borg were coming. But the end of season 3, when it aired, it was, people couldn't believe it. You're like, oh my God. And of course, Michael Piller thought he was on the show for only one season, so he wrote himself literally into a corner. He's like, someone else is going to have to figure this out. And there's a lot that was going on, which, by the way, you should get the Blu-rays of Star Trek The Next Generation, because get the whole series on Blu-ray. They look amazing, and you can watch all of our documentaries. Or if you specifically want to hear about that particular episode, there is a single disc movie-only version of both parts of Best of Both Worlds that I did a half-an-hour documentary for, where Elizabeth Dennehy is interviewed, and it's pretty interesting. So yes, it was amazing, Willow. It was amazing to watch that in the first place. This is an interesting letter, quick letter, comes from Evan Newman. Rob, the Halloween season is upon us, and I, like many, will be watching many of my favorite horror movies soon. However, I'm always looking to expand my horror movie horizons, which is where you come in. Could you please make a video or write a post about some of the off-the-beaten-path horror movies that you'd recommend every genre fan see, perhaps in the vein of your A through F movies videos from the spring? You've mentioned that many horror fans do not watch anything older than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but a video or list from you could remedy that. Thank you, Evan Newman in Wisconsin. Evan, you know what, my man? Great idea. I am going to do that this Sunday. This Sunday, I'm doing a horror episode. Maybe I'll do my top 25 horror films of all time. Now, some of them you're going to know. Yeah, I'm not, but I'll throw in some obscurities and things that I happen to like, and to tell you where to go, what to watch, what to do. But I think that's a great idea. A lot of people are always asking me about horror, and maybe I should finally get around to doing it. This one comes from Suthius Trong. Suthius is a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, longtime imagination connoisseur. Hey, Mr. B, because my youngest son, is now more active, and with your current time frame for the show, I haven't been able to catch it live. So I thought I'd send in a letter to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart: eating. We always talk about verisimilitude in TV shows and in movies. One tiny aspect of this, though very important in my opinion, is the simple deed of eating something. When I go through a movie or even a 20-minute TV episode and I don't see at least one person chewing on something or even biting on something, it drives me crazy. To me, what makes the real connection more realistic is when a character eats. Surely they are also human or humanoid, although in a fictional universe, they have to eat. They must eat. A prime example of this, when I recently rewatched it, is from Dante's Peak. There's a scene where just before the team is heading up the mountain with equipment, Pierce Brosnan's character is eating a bowl of cereal while getting preparations underway. Someone would totally do this in real life, no matter what they were getting ready for, especially if they were crunching for time. Even Nat, who was doing everything she could to keep it together while heading up the base in time when the world was slowly healing from a universal level tragedy in Endgame, made herself a PB&J sandwich to eat, which Scott shortly followed suit. I don't know about you, but something as simple as eating is verisimilitude greatness. It makes it feel that, yeah, these characters are totally in our world and we are in theirs. What are your thoughts on this? Thank you for the time. Suthius, first of all, what a wonderfully delightful letter that it was. To be honest, I've never paid it much attention. I will tell you what sucks. Filming a scene where characters are eating. As a film editor myself, it's a nightmare. If you have characters sitting around a dinner table, a cafe, or whatever, and they're eating or drinking, it makes it infinitely more difficult to structure a scene because when you're cutting, you're dealing with the continuity. How full is the drink? If someone's eating a sandwich, how many bites have they taken? So when you're shooting a scene that has multiple points of view, multiple angles, multiple pieces of coverage, when you're trying to edit that together, let's say they're sitting at a cafe, it's a 3-minute scene. How many hamburgers do you have to have on ready to go when you're shooting? Because every time you move the camera, it could take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour for another light setup. Every time someone takes a sip, how much did they take? And you have to make sure continuity nightmares, just nightmares, which is why you don't see people eating a lot in movies. It creates very, very many problems. But that's a great, in terms of the filmmaking process. But I agree with you. And I think why you notice it is because we don't see it very much. And sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes eating is the whole point. But it's really difficult to create verisimilitude in a scene where people are eating because you're constantly moving and changing and you have less quantities in your glass. And you have to make sure, like, how full is the glass in the last shot? It's tough. But I love that you asked that question. What a great question to ask. Yeah, I think that's really kind of cool. Really kind of cool. This next one comes from Christopher Collins. I was watching the press conference for Gemini Man with Scott Mantz interviewing the cast and crew recently. The press asked a bunch of questions that brought up moral and ethical implications of this technology. What are your thoughts on the ethical and moral question of having a completely CGI character? We live in a world now that we have already seen de-aging in multiple Disney and Marvel films, a CGI Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. We're also seeing in the film yesterday a CGI older John Lennon that never existed, that was older than in his lifetime. We've also seen Tom Hanks interact with people who were dead in Forrest Gump. Do you think we will see people, governments, terrorists utilize this technology or similar tech to do something similar to Star Trek The Next Generation and Unification Part 2 and make fake messages like from a political or military authority in the same way they did Ambassador Spock and cause trouble? Or utilize this technology to actually make masks that accomplish what we see in Mission Impossible? Do you think we will see actors or historic figures like John Wayne, Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Peter Lorre, Leonard Nimoy, Carrie Fisher, or even Robin Williams interact with current actors and actresses in future films or shows because of technology like Gemini Man? Well, Christopher, great letter. And I think, unfortunately, the answer is yes. We are going to see all of those things. However, again, it's going to be an evolutionary process. I do believe that when you're watching a CG, one of the things that I think makes movies and television shows and things that this kind of media special is still that you're watching your fellow human beings. And no matter how great AI or deep fakes or the computer technology advances, there is, I mean, for an AI to be able to create a twinkle in someone's eye or an inflection or something, eventually it'll happen. It's going to happen. But I think it's the same reason we like the genuine article. Human beings like things that are real. And I don't want to watch a movie that Marilyn Monroe is in that's coming out in the next year, knowing it's not really Marilyn Monroe. That ineffable, whatever it was, that quality that she brought to the screen, the quality that she had, the Monroe-ness of her is not going to be the same. And I don't think, I'd like to believe that eventually, look, it's going to happen. Yes, we're going to have all kinds of turmoil because of deep fake videos. We're going to get politicians appearing to say things that they never said. We're going to go through a period of time where all of this it's going to be hugely problematic because basically human beings are monumental douchebags until we figure out how not to be. So yeah, we're going to see it in the next 25 years. But this is the artistic side of the moral and ethical quandaries that we're going to be dealing with technology. I mean, I'm more interested. These are kind of the fun problems, but what happens when you can randomly decide the color of your daughter or son's eyes, or when you can genetically engineer whatever traits you want in someone? First of all, that goes against evolution. And although what's very interesting is I was watching Joe Rogan's show when he had what's that guy's name? Lazar. And Lazar, the guy who worked at an adjunct of Area S1 or something and worked with apparently an extraterrestrial gravity engine. Bob Lazar, I think it's Bob Lazar. And in that conversation, by the way, it's fascinating. That Joe Rogan show, all 2 hours of it, very fascinating. But what was interesting was they touched on the part that what if biological entities, that our job is to give life to AI, that's ultimately sentient life and a self-advanced life like us. Our job is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make our own lives easier through automation, through technology. What if our job is to eventually give birth to artificial life or machine life? That's our job. That's what our evolutionary job is in the universe. I never thought about that before. I think that's really fascinating. So we're going to have to be grappling with these issues, and it ain't going to be pretty. But you know what? It's going to be interesting to watch. So I'm kind of stoked about it. This next one, by the way, I love this letter. This next one comes from longtime imagination connoisseur Ian Samuels, who touches on, well, I'll let Ian Samuels take it away. Ian is a longtime imagination connoisseur. He writes a lot of letters. There's a lot of letters from him up on the website, so check him out. This one I particularly enjoy. War of the Worlds. One of my all-time favorite books is H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, the novel which started the whole alien invasion genre. But when it comes to adaptations of this great novel, the quality has been up and down. To be kind, you better not besmirch my beloved 1953 War of the Worlds, Ian, or you're dead to me. Orson Welles famously adapted the novel for a radio broadcast in 1938. This has become famous due to the newspaper headlines the next day suggesting that the broadcast caused panic as the listening public were convinced that it was true. This, of course, turned out to be untrue and just made up by the papers just to sell copies. I know, unheard of. But Orson was apparently disappointed as it turned out that not many heard the broadcast, and those that did were not overall impressed. Then we come to the Hollywood version in 1953. As is their wont, they took a story and moved away from the English countryside to America. The film was not an accurate depiction of the book. That does not take away from what a classic bit of cinema this film has become. The film is great and deserves its status as a classic. You're a good man, Ian. You're a good man. In 1978, what got the most accurate depiction of the book and came in the form of a record, or more accurately, two 12-inch vinyl records, the magical and truly masterful Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds. If you guys, Ian is very correct. If you guys have never heard the two album, the double LP of Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, it's amazing. Jeff, oh, by the way, there's an incredible remastered CD that came out a couple of years back, which you got to get. It's great. Jeff Wayne put together a great cast. The narrator, the journalist, is played by the legendary Welsh actor Richard Burton, a longtime friend of Jeff Wayne's. The sung thoughts of the journalist are performed by Justin Hayward from the Moody Blues, whose biggest hit was Nights in White Satin. Justin Hayward's version of Forever Autumn from the album became a hit single. David Essex, English pop star who had a lot of success in the 70s and into the 80s, played the artilleryman. Chris Thompson is the voice of humanity, singer and musician who performed with Manfred Mann. Another legend in the form of Thin Lizzy frontman Phil Lincott, who was once asked by an American interviewer, "What's it like being black and Irish?" Phil replied, "It's like being a pint of Guinness," plays the parson Nathaniel. Singer Julie Covington, who had appeared in Godspell along with David Essex in an original stage play of Rocky Horror, plays Beth, the parson's wife. Despite being a musical version, this was the most accurate to the book. 1988 brought us the Greg Stranges War of the Worlds TV series. By the way, do you know why Greg Stranges got to make that War of the Worlds TV series? Because the Stranges brothers were going to make Star Trek at Fox. Paramount pulled it back and they had to throw him a bone because of Roddenberry. And that's how the War of the Worlds TV series was born. The pilot of which was called War of the Worlds Resurrection. I really enjoyed the TV series. It went out of its way to link to the previous versions. The main character, Harrison Blackwood, played by Jared Martin, is the adopted son of Clayton Forrester and Sylvia Van Buren, the main characters of the 1953 version. They had an episode that, by the way, Jared Martin was in. Fantastic Journey. They had an episode that visited a town that was linked to the Orson Welles radio play, claiming that Orson had visited the town. They tried to establish in the series that the H.G. Wells book was based on the first invasion and the 1953 film was the second invasion, but then they established that the Martians had come to Earth even earlier with an episode on a Native American reservation where an ancient Martian ship had been buried. The second season of the series tried to be a survival story with the Martians successful. In 2005, we get Spielberg and Cruise's version. Sounded exciting, but damn, it was awful. A film made with no sense of science, logic, or dare I say it, verisimilitude, except for the first 20 minutes, dude. Dope. Much of the premise of the first half of the story is a newsworthy event of lightning striking more than once in the same place. The film was made in 2005. It was made in 1955, then maybe you could believe they were not aware that lightning does indeed strike the same place multiple times. It was terrible. That's all that needs to be said. Now, once again, we find ourselves in exciting times with not one, but two adaptations. The BBC has a period version, perhaps more accurate to the book, as it is set in the Edwardian period, and we get a modern version from Fox and Studio Canal. Interesting and exciting times indeed. Also available is Jeff Wayne's musical version on stage, including a floating head with a reconstructed image of Richard Burton still providing their narration, and also a next generation version with Jeff Wayne offering new parts and a new cast. Also, Stephen Baxter, there's two sequels to War of the Worlds. There's the Strugatsky brothers wrote, the Russian science fiction writers wrote the second Invasion from Mars. And then Stephen Baxter wrote a sequel that came out a couple of years ago that takes place. It is a direct sequel to Wells's novel. And it was pretty good. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. So Ian Samuels, thank you for that. Anybody that throws some love toward my very first favorite movie when I was 5 years old, which was War of the Worlds, is a fan of mine. RMB, I am a golden god, says Movie Fanobi. See Free Enterprise. Well, I Am a Golden God is, of course, from Almost Famous, one of my favorite movies of all time, especially the longer version, the bootleg cut, which you need to watch. But See Free Enterprise, thank you. I appreciate that. It's funny, people don't know. I mean, I guess you guys know. People find it strange that I did once write and direct a movie. Hopefully you'll see it in 4K sooner than later. Suthius says, "Hey, Mr. B, are you going to light up your hot toys?" People keep saying that. I got lights. I just have these cabinets are from 15 years ago, and their lighting system sucks. And I got to fix. They actually have fuses in them that I got new fuses. I just haven't fixed them. And I did buy digital LED lights to go in there, and maybe one day because I really want to set them up. I've got a third one too. But when I move in, if I ever move in, I'm gonna move in. My new set's dope, so hopefully I will. They need to be lit up. Everybody wants me to light them up. My man, Joshua Levesque is here. Joshua goes back and forth and on Twitter with me. I think this is his first letter. It is indeed. So, Joshua, thanks for writing. Here you go. Hey, Rob, longtime follower since AMC Heroes. My God, that was April of 2015. It seems so long ago. And a relatively new Robservations viewer. Anyway, I've been a huge Star Wars fan since I was a little kid, repetitively watching The Phantom Menace on VHS. Then I saw Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith in theaters, and they blew my mind at the time. However, I was a lot younger, and my opinions of them have drastically changed. I love the revolutionary CGI, the epic lightsaber battles, the new characters, except for Jar Jar, and the lore, but as movies, they are terrible. The dialogue, the directing, most of the acting, and everything non-Star Wars related is atrocious in those movies, but I'm glad we got them. I, unlike you, enjoy the new episodic Star Wars movies, and I love Rogue One. I like Rogue One. I love Rey, Kylo Ren, Snoke, and the returning characters, and sincerely hope JJ knocks it out of the park with the rise of Skywalker. I honestly think the potential is higher than ever for this Disney-era Star Wars movie because it has Darth Sidious, the Knights of Ren, the Death Star, Sith Troopers, and finally an answer to who Rey is. A girl is no one, by the way. I personally cannot wait, and it is my most anticipated movie of 2019, even more than Avengers Endgame. My question is, with all of the potential, how successful do you think The Rise of Skywalker will be, critically, by the fans, and financially? Thanks, and may the Force be with you, master of fun and wonder. Well, Joshua, first of all, thank you. Thanks for writing in. Like I've always said, I enjoy the trilogy, the prequel trilogy. I think they're bad movies, but they're good Star Wars, and I've learned to enjoy chunks of them. I don't think they hold together, but there's enough in each movie that I actually do enjoy watching. So I can see that, and a lot of people grew up with them. So good on them. You know, everyone, even I'm pulling for Rise of Skywalker. I want to go into a theater. I want to see a Star Wars movie. I want to be elated. I want to come out of there like I felt when I saw Empire Strikes Back for the first time. Star Wars was seeing it for the first time in the theater was it didn't even compute. I sat there and I didn't even know what I was seeing. There was nothing in human history that had occurred before. So I couldn't be excited about it. It was like a psilocybin mushroom trip that led me to a deeper understanding of the universe. That's what seeing Star Wars was like the first time. But seeing Empire was something I anticipated, and I was worried about it because I was like, can the dude who did the special effects for Space 1999 really do as good a job as John Dykstra? Well, he did. Empire Strikes Back was amazing. But I think we're all pulling. I'm pulling for JJ as much as I have loathed his previous theatrical features. I'm pulling for him. I want JJ to stick this landing more than anything. I want him to just knock it out of the park. I want it to be wonderful. I really, really do. I don't think there's any way to live up to our expectations of what it's supposed to be. I do not envy the man. But I really hope it's good. I hope it's good. Wouldn't that be great if it was? So, and thanks for the letter, Joshua. I very much appreciate that. Good to hear from you, other than on Twitter. Thanks for sending in a letter. I appreciate it. This next letter, my man, John Price. I love John Price. John Price writes a lot of articles on Medium about Star Trek. John Price, I don't think John Price has ever sent me a letter. John Price wrote about Star Trek. I love it. Hi there, Rob. Your neighborhood-friendly John Price here. Lots and lots of things to talk about after that Star Trek Discovery New York Comic-Con panel, but there's no point in discussing the buffoonery that is Star Trek Discovery. Instead, let's talk about Picard and I think the word is optimism? If you may not know, I've been against a Picard show from the start. I don't trust anyone involved with CBS Trek to do it in a way that is anywhere close to good. Moreover, there's nothing new to tell us about Picard. We know this character inside and out, with the exception of giving us more adventures of a character we like. There's no point to making a new show. I still don't trust anyone over there, but unlike the first trailers to Star Trek Discovery back in 2017 that made me want to punch the wall repeatedly and scream until I lost my voice, the first trailers to Star Trek Picard have increased my optimism from 0% to, let's say, 5%. See, part of the problem these guys were always facing, and the one I don't think they have yet realized, is that every single Star Trek fan has in their head a plan for what they would do with Star Trek. There's a reason Star Trek fans have crafted fan fiction since 1967. It's a universe that all of us wish we could live in, and we all have stories in our head that we tell. Some of our stories are very good, like your Federation idea, and some of them aren't, like most stories at fanfic.com. Either way, when they started rebooting Star Trek, the immediate pushback from fandom was in part because JJ and CBS were telling stories that directly opposed the stories we all had in our heads. Doesn't make us right, doesn't make them wrong, just the way it is with fandom. This is all to say that my Star Trek idea was set in the aftermath of Nemesis and after Star Trek '09, the Hobus supernova. I'm a historian, so I think I know exactly how the post-Hobus Alpha Quadrant would unfold. The Romulan Star Empire has been balkanized into innumerable vying factions, groups, and governments under the backdrop of a re-emerging Cold War dynamic between the Federation and the Klingons as they try and expand their spheres of influence into the vacuum. The obvious parallels to the Middle East are obvious: refugees, fundamentalism, sectarianism, revolts against modernity, rise in identity nationalism, endless pointless wars, imperialist ennui, all of it right there for the author to exploit, the author being me in this case. Well, now that Star Trek Picard is dealing with this time period and political situation, my ideas are irrelevant, and we have to deal with the story they're giving us. So what are they giving us? Borg experimentation? Integrating Seven and Picard's backstories? Heck, even the return of Hugh. It all seems okay so far. I like the actors I recognize, Alison Pill especially. And the more I read about Stewart having to be convinced to return, the more I can feel that optimism creeping in. I even like the old Romulan warbird being used in the chaotic post-Romulan diaspora. I actually hope it's the P-team ship, but I don't think it is, the Picard team. I hope the guy who played the executive in charge of radishes gets at least an Easter egg reference, like he's eating a radish or something. Data looks terrible. Yeah, I know it's a dream and I can rationalize it away as it's impressionistic, but come on, that looks awful. Make one less Star Trek Discovery episode and use that $1 billion to pay for some digital de-aging. And while we're at it, throw some of that computer money at the other actors' faces too, especially Frakes. It's easy to forget that Riker was 29 when Frakes was 35, so let's suck in that gut, boys. The idea that there's a Jesus figure that Picard has to help makes me break out in hives, but hey, I like Firefly, so it can work if done properly. The mid-jump transport was dumb in Star Trek '09 and in STB, and it's Star Trek Beyond, and it's still dumb in Star Trek Picard. I have a theory that a lot of the scenes we've seen are actually flashbacks, but that's just an idea I had that's probably too clever. But then again, Kurtzman isn't writing the series. Kirsten Beyer and Michael Chabon are. Uh-oh, here comes that hope again. You're still alive, my old friend. There's been major social media pushback against the lack of Dr. Beverly Crusher. The objections are dead on, too. Crusher is the most logical character to feature. Picard's only been in love with her for like 30 years. Some on Twitter think she's in the show but being hidden for maximum surprise. Maybe. My own theory is they're going to fridge her and have her pre-show death be a ham-fisted emotional weight on him. Either way, hashtag Picard needs Bev is a thing now, and I'm with it. Kurtzman says he doesn't want Star Trek Picard to be a reunion show, but he's already 4/7 of the way there, so we'll see. I'm totally down for Seven being more than just a pilot episode Herald character, though. Voyager set up some really great ideas with the Borg, so I'd love to see Unimatrix Zero and the Collective integrated into a larger Borg story. Any news related to the ongoing embarrassment called Star Trek Discovery Season 3 and the hilariously region-blocked short treks still makes me want to vomit, but the confluence of factors around Star Trek Picard are actually encouraging. So, how do I feel? Most surprisingly, I feel fine. Well, once again, John Price, thanks for writing in. That was a terrific letter. You know, I think a lot of Star Trek fans are thinking about Picard. As you pointed out, the Jesus character, this Daj character, this woman that may or may not be Picard's daughter or a hybrid clone daughter of the Borg Queen in Picard. I think what we're going to see with Picard, and I hope I'm wrong, is a standard story that we've seen in a number of different mediums transposed into Star Trek. I would much prefer to have seen a story, and again, I keep going back to this book I read by one of my favorite writers who's been controversial lately, Dan Simmons. Dan Simmons wrote a book called Phases of Gravity about a fictional astronaut who comes back from the moon, and he's dealing with the fact that even though his life is not half over yet, the most significant thing he will ever do in his life is behind him, which is go to the moon. And he has to deal with his son and basically his life, knowing that nothing will live up to what he's already done. And how do you lead a life like that? How do you continue on? And I think the one thing about Star Trek Picard, from what I've seen, and I fear it, the thing that I fear the most, is that they have written Picard as a generic older character who talks about running away from the past, and he's all depressed. It could be any old character. What they haven't done, and that is because Patrick Stewart, who has an enormous amount of control and pull with the writers, has basically written himself in as a character. It's not the character of Jean-Luc Picard, it's Patrick Stewart. And how does Patrick Stewart view being an older man? And that kind of bums me out. And I see a lot of that in the story already. We're getting these generic tropes. Oh yes, I live on a vineyard and I live in a house in the woods, and all these things that they could be any story. I want to know what William T. Riker and what Deanna Troi would actually be doing, not what the writers say they're doing, because hey, they're raising a family and probably in Alaska, where Riker's from, unless they didn't get that far. I don't believe that. I understand it's easier because they want to film it. It's easy. Let's go on location and make it look beautiful. I don't believe it. I don't believe that characters that are living in the 23rd century with all that stuff and whatever was going on, I don't believe they would just come home and move into a 20th century looking house. I just don't. I think already that's what gives me pause. I want it to be good, but I don't even think, the one saving grace when you ask about Unimatrix Zero is Kirsten Beyer has written 10 Voyager novels. She knows that show like the back of her hand. And I think she's written good novels. Some people say, come on, Rob, aren't they a little too more like romantic novels, like bodice ripper novels? Well, as far as Star Trek goes, maybe so, but I still think they're good novels. And, we'll wait and see. I'm cautiously optimistic, but nothing you said, John, is incorrect. So I want Picard to be good. I really do. I think we all do, don't we? Don't we all want Picard to be great? God, I hope it's good. I really do. I really hope it's good. Suthia says, have you seen the concept art for All Hail the King shot of Godzilla in King of the Monsters? It's in the background, my dude. Gigan. Oh, what would have been size. You know what? I love Godzilla King of the Monsters. I really did. I know Gigan was in there. I have seen it. We'll see. Gigan's been brought back a couple of times. I kind of like that modern version. He had the saw that they modified a bit. I'm into Gigan. Suthia says, I will help spread positivity in the form of my enjoyment of Discovery. Not a huge fan as others. I've watched some old episodes, but I love this new one. Again, Suthius, far be it for me to say nobody should be a fan of something. I do not want to be a Debbie Downer in that way. But my problem with the writing staff of Star Trek Discovery is they don't know their science fiction. They're writing very generic stories, and the science fiction the episodes that have a science fiction bent are not good. And they're not bringing forth interesting science fiction concepts. There's so many interesting things going on now in our modern day that you could apply towards Star Trek. And I feel that most of the people writing for Star Trek are out of their depth, or they're writing for other kinds of shows. I think Michelle Paradise is not the right fit for Star Trek, and yet she's the showrunner on Discovery. I thought Q&A, the first short trek, was abysmal. It showed me that these writers have a complete lack of understanding of Spock. I talked about it the other day. This idea that Spock was this wet behind the ears. No, he was not. Spock is like, he's a badass. He was always a badass. He was not like Data, who didn't understand humanity. He went to Starfleet Academy. He was a badass. He was at the top of his game. And the way that they wrote him in that episode, when he just comes on board the Enterprise, it was as if he just started talking, do you like eggplant? Like, give me a break. I mean, there's no understanding of what Star Trek is. There's this generic understanding, like, let's write this character as if this is the first time he stepped on aboard a starship. And it doesn't work at all. It just shows me, I'm like, these people don't know how to write science fiction, and they certainly don't know how to write Star Trek. Now, because it's not sophisticated writing. It's not sophisticated. As a matter of fact, I dare say it's dumb, like everything in Star Trek Discovery. But I know that people like it because it's the first. If you've never seen Star Trek, like, you have to understand, I've been ensconced and immersed in Star Trek since I was 5 years old. So I've thought about these things for a long time. So if you're coming to Discovery and that's the first experience you've had with Star Trek, it looks beautiful. It's very lavishly produced. I totally understand why people love it. And I don't want to take that away from somebody. I really don't. And if you want to love Discovery, you should love Discovery. But if you've grown up your entire life with Star Trek, it's very difficult to accept a show like Discovery that is clearly not made by people who like, everyone says they like Star Trek, but there's not a lot of understanding of the franchise, and that's what's maddening about it. Anyway, that's just me. Chris Provoto wrote a letter. Chris is here. Good day to the Viceroy of Verisimilitude. It is I, a humble gesture to your show, that wanted to chime in on a topic from Robservations number 243. After listening to your discussion about the short Trek Q&A that was shown with the elevator scene, I wish to chime in from my own personal naval perspective. I don't speak for the entire Navy, just my opinions. I hope this isn't too bold, but since Star Trek 09, a few aspects of these shows greatly irritate me. This input comes from 22 years of naval service when I was stationed on board 6 Carrier, visited every platform of ships we have in service, from an amphibious assault cruiser, destroyers, and minesweepers. A literal? Only one I'm not greatly familiar with are subs. I've walked up and down these classes on 64 different ships. This also includes 24 supply ships that are not designed nor meant for warfare. A common place to ship despair and memorable moments from Enterprise, Star Trek, the original series, TNG, and Voyager are the engineering sections around the warp core. My background is not as a pit snipe, an engineering rate, but in logistics. But I've been around 2 nuclear reactors when not in operations. DS9 had a core, but we never saw it, so this show is safe from my critique. Many people have bashed on the NX-01 Enterprise, but there are things I've admired since those years ago. The episodes of practice on asteroids for target practice, the blueprints online and keeping true to them for the schematics, and smaller sections on board the ship felt real. Felt like a real ship in Earth's infancy of space exploration. And no love to the chiefs, but the designers had a brilliant purpose to show the crawl as a baby explorers. When I first saw the engineering sections in Star Trek 09, I was pissed. And seeing chatter online for the short trek showing the elaborate elevator section, I was disappointed. I'm glad the visual creatures went for those flashy pop sections to grab the normal people outside of Star Trek lore for building a new audience. But as a lifelong Trek adorer and naval person, these scenes are absolute crap. To me, these new ships are from designers spending weekend trips on cruise liners. Lavish designs, space to spare, casinos with raw water slides, and huge areas of useless space for entertaining the guests. These are the RMS Titanic in space. On all the warships I've been on, only the USS Independence, CV-62, had an escalator which mostly didn't work. It went up 3 or 4 decks or floors. Some of the supply ships have an AN elevator. Sure, there's elevators on warships, but those are for aircraft, ordnance, and extremely heavy cargo movement, not personal or not personnel. You're the captain of the ship. You walk up and down stairs. Presidents visiting a carrier, walk it. Junior newbie, start walking. And if you ever walked up a ladder well, term for staircase, these steps are small with steep inclines that close at the top of the section in case of flooding. We close each section possible to minimize dangers. Therefore, the Japanese battleship Yamato and the German battleship Bismarck took a long time to sink. Water integrity. It saves lives, keeps damage to a specific area of the ship, and damage control crews can focus on a few locations. Space on a ship is a luxury. Each section is painfully designed for usage of space to the best abilities available, holding cargo, ordnance, equipment, and such. Seeing the abomination from 2009 and onward is shit. On the luxury ship Discovery, I guess being hundreds of thousands to light years away from a spaceport doesn't mean they need extra cargo. The ship's computer must be a small tablet in the corner of a room. Wasting valuable space on a ship far from home for that visual pop was more important than seeing how a real ship in space could or should be built. And while the luxury ship Discovery is out and about, seems the lessons from the RMS Titanic were lost on them of a small section that closes off for emergencies. Sure, they didn't have to worry about water coming in quickly to sink the ship, but those large sections in Discovery will easily kill dozens once sucked into space. One hull breach in the roller coaster elevator section and the entire ship will greatly be in jeopardy of imploding, killing several and sucking out anything not bolted down. It kills me to think that they designed this without taking a trip something like to, I don't know, the USS Midway in San Diego, which herself is a museum, to see how real ships are made. I know Starfleet isn't a military first, but I can't believe they designed ships without ideas of battle stations. We'll call this general quarters in the Navy. Hollywood changed it up a bit in mind. I bring up engineering as Star Trek 09 just seemed like a water factory they got to film in. It was a brewery, which gave the idea that the engineering sections are the size of shopping malls. How many times have we seen a door closed during warp core breaches? How big of a door is in the elevator section of the luxury ship Discovery? A retractable roof at Safeco T-Mobile Field in Seattle? Point is, they're supposed to be exploring far from Earth. They need each little space for various types of equipment and supplies. They take stuff for the events they didn't plan on, not just for what they did plan on. And each section should be small and easy to close in case of an emergency, not these large parking garages of space. The engineering of the ship is bullshit. They should be embarrassed about it, patting themselves on the back. Oh, wait, they can't cause someone will randomly call HR about some type of abuse, I'm sure. The luxury ship Discovery, location of vacuum entertainment. I realize this is a non-Hollywood pick-apart that doesn't work well when visually trying to sell the story of how large and grand the ships are, but as a ship, this doesn't work for me at all. Perhaps even a few of my naval brothers and sisters will agree or disagree on my points, but as someone that joined the Navy that was heavily influenced by Star Trek, it greatly disheartens me to see how far those responsible since 2009's revision have taken this show away from the core of what it was, and great for decades. Thank you, Chris Provoto. Chris, it drives me berserk, especially if somebody who looked at blueprints, like everybody for the first, up until Star Trek 09, everybody that worked on the show of Star Trek, everybody, especially in the art department, tried to make it all functional and believable. Everybody. And it was. Like, you could get the Star Trek, look, I don't care whether the whales that are on board the Enterprise D that are there for navigation are really there. They're in the blueprints. They're in the cetacean navigation section or whatever it's called. Yes, Willow Yang, there are whales on the Enterprise D. We just never see them. But they're in the blueprints that were done by Rick Sternbach and Mike Okuda. So I always thought that why shouldn't there be there? I mean, once you've repopulated the Earth with whales, as we saw at the end of the voyage home, why shouldn't there be whales in Starfleet? Makes sense to me. But anyway, I agree with you. I can't watch Star Trek Discovery when they do stuff like that. It makes my gums bleed. It ruins any verisimilitude, any goodwill they have, because they don't care. They don't care. And the problem is, when you're making a science fiction show, look at a show like The Expanse. You believe in it. You believe in it. They do such a good job of both with, look, do they bend their science? Sure, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Here is another letter. Matthew Bradley Smith writes, Dear Rob, greetings from the CLE, or as it was known when you were growing up, the Mistake on the Lake. I discovered your channel almost 2 months ago thanks to your appearances on Midnight's Edge. I'm glad that I did, as the Post-Geek Singularity has proven to be the community of my dreams. Many people here seem to park their shuttlecraft in the same bay as I do. I'm presently just under 2 weeks behind due to the birth of my daughter. Well, congratulations, Matthew. Congratulations on that. That must be amazing. On Robservations, I'm listening to episode 233 at the moment, but there's something I just have to write to you about. something that is in my thoughts almost constantly. Rob, I want to talk to you about collecting capital ship toys. Oh my God, I love this letter already so much. Capital ships are without a doubt one of my top 5, if not number 1, favorite things about science fiction. From the first time I saw Return of the Jedi taped off of pay-per-view at the age of 3, I was fascinated with both the Rebel and Imperial fleets at the Battle of Endor. The words Star Destroyer sound so big to a 3-year-old. And when you add the word super in front, it becomes even more awe-inspiring. The Mon Calamari starships, with their Zeppelin-esque motif, were everything my small brain could want in an alien starship. I wanted to play with these ships, but sadly, no toy like that existed yet. Fast forward to the year 1995, and I'm in the 5th grade with a fresh appreciation for Star Wars, thanks to the remastered trilogy I got on VHS that Christmas. On the playground, I encounter a 3rd grader who is playing with a pocket-sized X-Wing. I'm intrigued, and we strike up a conversation. I'd been aware of micro machines before this instance, but I'd assured they'd only made one toy cars like my cousin had. Now I was finding out that not only were there Star Wars micro machines, but there were small Star Destroyers, blockade runners, Nebulon B frigates. Even more important was the amount of detail that Galoob had put into the sculpt and paint job on each vessel. My head was swimming with thoughts of the pitched battles I could have on my bedroom floor if I could amass an armada of these tiny vessels. From that moment forward, I was constantly asking for them as gifts and buying them with my own money. This is the greatest letter I've ever read. Time jump again. It's now fall of 1997, and I'm walking into the KB Toys liquidator store near my grandparents' home. I've now grown to appreciate other sci-fi franchises that begin. I've now grown to appreciate another sci-fi franchise that begins with the word star. You might say it was a bit of a trek for my mind to appreciate it. Wink, wink. I digress. As I walk into the store front and center, there's a bin filled to the rim with what I immediately recognize as the familiar packaging of Micro Machines' space product. Upon further inspection, I discovered to my delight it is a Star Trek Micro Machines collection. It is full of vessels I'd grown to covet over my Saturday afternoon spent watching the Star Trek syndication block of TNG and DS9 back-to-back on a local station. The cherry on top was that this collection of 16 was only $15. The $20 bill I had in my pocket suddenly felt like it was on fire. My only regret is that I only had enough for one of the huge stack of them. Now that collection goes anywhere from $50 to $100. My poor wallet was subjected to further abuse for several more years, as during my freshman year, a comic toy store opened with a sizable stock of loose and boxed micro machines for both Star Wars and Star Trek. On top of that, I was buying models and other products to increase the size of my flotilla. My collector's fleet Star Destroyer sits as a flagship of my Imperial task force, and I have 2 Diamond Select Sovereign-class vehicles to boldly go where no man has gone before. Sadly, all good things must come to an end. As I grew older, the sources for my collection had slowed to a trickle. Galoob, the creators owners of Micro Machines, went broke and were snapped up by Hasbro. The line ended shortly after that. The comic toy shop went out of business without telling anyone, and my sources for model kits stopped stocking sci-fi models. While I was content with my fleets as they were, I couldn't let my money pile up, so I moved on to other interests that were available to a 16-year-old with no car and no credit card. Fast forward to the present day. Every now and then, a product will appear that fits my parameters of my fleet building needs. It has to be affordable, of decent quality, and has to be of relative close scale to my other ships. Sadly, those products are few and far between. I was overjoyed on the first Force Friday when I walked through my local Target to find that Hasbro had seemingly resurrected the Micro Machines Star Wars line to coincide with the release of The Force Awakens. I bought several packs in my excitement. Sadly, when I got home, I discovered that Hasbro had been stingy with the materials to cut down on costs. These were not the same level of quality that I'd come to know from Galoob. Besides being slightly smaller and with far less detail in the sculpt, they felt they would break if I breathed too hard on them. I was heartbroken. When The Last Jedi came out, Disney allowed Hot Wheels to put out die-cast ships, but the only capital ship was a First Order Star Destroyer. Solo saw an Imperial Star Destroyer and the Arrestor-class cruiser released, but that's it. The Armada tabletop game is an option, but those ships are on the pricier side of things. Yes, they are. The Star Trek end of my collection hasn't fared much better, as the only options available to me are either Eagle Moss, outside of my budget at the moment, or unpainted tabletop miniatures. I love what Eagle Moss is doing, and I hope to begin collecting them in the future, but it still doesn't provide a way to collect vessels en masse. And now, sooner than now, you might think that this letter is just me throwing a big pity party for myself. That's only partially accurate. In truth, my point has been laid out in my story. The point is that I think there needs to be an affordable gateway into the collectible model capital ship scene again. Action figures have Funko Pops to serve that purpose, and Galoob's Micro Machines brand served that purpose when I was young. Anyway, those are my thoughts on capital ship collecting, Rob. Do you agree with me? I imagine you were beyond them by the time they came on the scene, but did you have any Star Wars, Star Trek Micro Machines? I'd love to hear yours and other Post-Geek Singularity members' thoughts on this. Thank you for your time and consideration. Matthew Bradley Smith. Well, when I say this is one of my favorite letters, I mean it. As everyone knows, I love spaceships. I've been collecting them since I was a little kid. And yes, I had Star Trek Micro Machines. My only problem with, I'll tell you what my problem with the Star Wars Micro Machines were. They were always bent, like the warp nacelles were always bent. They were never straight because of the materials they use. But there was also a whole line of capsule toys from Japan, a ton of them. And hell, I have boxes of them somewhere that are unopened, but they're like Micro Machines, but they were put out in Japan that are pretty cool. There was different versions, like Futura made them, or Faruja, that were great. I mean, I loved all those things, but now, you know what? As a kid who's built model spaceships my whole life, I can't get enough of them. The little ones bum me out. I was always a size queen when it came to Star Trek ships. The bigger, the better, to make up for, I always wanted the bigger spaceships, perhaps to make up for personal shortcomings. but I like, look, I got a lot of Eagle Moss ships. I don't have all the Eagle Moss ships. It's funny. I was getting them all. I don't have any of the XL. I want to get all the Eagle Moss XL stuff. I like their bigger Galactica stuff, the alien stuff, but I want their bigger ships. I do have a lot of the Eagle Moss small things, and I like I've got K7 up there. I got the Enterprise in the motion picture. I mean the Enterprise, the ring ship Enterprise. But the XL ships are big. But I feel your pain. I mean, I understand. The only collection of ships that I have, and they put out a bunch of them, but I don't have all of them. They're really hard to get. Were from Legends of the Galactic Heroes, my favorite Japanese anime of all time. They had all the two ships, the Reinhard von Lohengram and Yang Wen Li's fleets, and I've been getting those. Actually, I bought them all, but they put a few more out. I've got like 8 sets of them. There's 8 boxes, but I don't have I couldn't get them. They're really hard to get. Any product from Legend of the Galactic Heroes is very, very difficult to get unless you find them in secondhand collectible stores in Japan. But also, I could talk about this. You and I should have an offline conversation. But what a great letter. Yes, finding capital ships, it's tough, man. Life's tough. I feel your pain. 8073 says, hey, Rob, my first super chat. Well, thank you very much. You talking about Discovery sounds like me going on about The Last Jedi to my kids. Just saying hi, Chris W. Well, Chris W., first of all, thanks for sending me your first super chat. Thanks for supporting the channel. I very much appreciate that. Sounds like you have a good family to indulge you. Now, I'm curious, are you still with so even though I disliked Force Awakens and I liked Last Jedi, I found it interesting. Do I think it's a flawless movie? No. I'm still looking for, look, it's a Star Wars movie, to be honest. And look, I'll say this, as much as I can't stand Star Trek Discovery, it does give me hope that they've gone 1,000 years in the future. The problem is, again, I don't think the writers are up to the task. And people are going to start saying, and you just don't like it because you had the Star Trek Federation idea about going 1,000 years in the future. So it has nothing to do with that. It really doesn't. Just like I have no problem with CBS and Star Trek because, people say, because they didn't let you make Axanar. And now people are like, well, Alec Peters is calling me a pathetic loser who can't work in Hollywood. So it really has nothing to do with Axanar either. And when I worked on Axanar, and by the way, everybody should go look at my 50 minutes of documentaries of all the work that I was doing for the Axanar feature film that you can find on the Burnettwork.net website, because very proud of that work. I worked on Axanar for 3 years. I want it to be good. It pains me to see when it's not good. But I want Rise of Skywalker to be great. I really do. I want it to be great. I want to walk in there and I want to be elated when I see it. Because why not? Here's a letter from Christopher Collins. By the way, I'm going to keep going until I get through all these letters. And just so you know, I don't know how many I've left. I'm going to read this letter. Christopher Collins says, you always bring up, don't put your universe before your characters. I have a question, though. For films where they put the universe before the characters, which was better? The Tom Cruise version of The Mummy, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, or Justice League? I would probably say, as much as I love character moments in Justice League, I love the score and character moments and jokes in Star Trek V. I think, as a whole, I prefer The Mummy. The Mummy has amazing action scenes. I love the opening with Tom Cruise because that's a different kind of character than I'd seen Tom Cruise portray before. I thought the film had better written villains than Justice League. I think part of why I like The Mummy more is the input Tom Cruise has and the fact that he loves movies. Justice League just feels like there are too many people inputting information and the studio gave up by rushing the film to get it out there on their date rather than wait for Henry Cavill to finish shooting Mission Impossible Fallout. Star Trek V is another film where I feel the story was rushed, but also from watching the special features, I don't think Shatner understood any of the characters' personality traits like the cast knew their characters. The jokes in Star Trek V tend to focus on making fun of how they didn't know something, like row, row, row your boat, Scotty knowing the ship like the back of his head, Scotty not being able to keep the ship together, Spock overshooting his rocket boots, or Sulu and Chekhov getting lost in the woods. Those are things I have trouble believing those characters would have trouble with and made their characters look incompetent. Shatner was going big and ran out of money on Star Trek V. Still gets me that he wanted rock people. Talk about a strange idea for God to have rock people in a desert. Well, we did get to see him in Galaxy Quest. I thought it was odd, too, that heaven was a desert rather than filled like the Garden of Eden or something else. What do you think, Rob? Well, Christopher Collins, that's interesting. The first question you bring up, the first thing you mention is that I always say, never put your universe before your characters or your story. As I've told people, that is the Burnett axiom. And I came up with that because everyone's trying to, well, not everyone, they were trying to create, based on the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they were trying to create their own universes because they do not understand how these things work. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, they might have wanted to have a cinematic universe the whole time. Their ideas was, sure, let's make Avengers movies. But what did they do? They made movies about the individual characters first. Because first of all, they didn't know if it was going to work. After the rousing success of Iron Man 1, they're like, wow, Robert Downey Jr. killed it. Favreau killed it. This is something we took basically a second-tier character, not second-tier necessarily in the comics for comics readers, but for the world at large. The world was not clamoring for an Iron Man movie the way they'd clamor for Spider-Man or even Captain America. But it all worked out. And they established Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man very much in their own movies before spinning them off into the Avengers. And they introduced Hawkeye and they introduced Black Widow. It was a very, very interesting and effective way of doing it. So we liked all those characters when they finally decided to put them together. Now, the reason, look, Avengers made $1.5 billion. People could not believe it. The success that the MCU had when the first Avengers came out was, even back then, something that was unheard of in Hollywood history. Nobody saw it coming. Now, there is a fundamental lack of understanding amongst other people as to what they did. People are like, well, we of course we can do that. Like, what can't, we've got the Universal Monsters. Let's build a franchise and we'll create the dark universe. Again, it doesn't work that way. You can't build a universe without first having good characters and good story. And that's what happens. You build a universe by introducing characters and giving us good stories to go along with those characters. And then you naturally, like, if you made a great Mummy movie, you made a great Frankenstein movie, you made a great Dracula movie, and a great werewolf movie, the next thing would be, if they're all great, people are like, what if we put them in a movie together? Who wouldn't want to see that? That is a natural inclination of humanity. And, you make an Iron Man movie, you make a Thor movie, and you make a Captain America movie, and they're all good. Who doesn't want to make an Avengers movie? Everybody wants an Avengers movie. I mean, that's the question that gets asked. And that's how it works. I only think of the movies that you bring up. Justice League was the same thing. They jumped ahead. Look, we all know the reasons. Justice League is just a mess of a film. It was replaced midstream. The director was replaced. It should never have happened. It should have been the Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League trilogy. Or if they're going to make a two-part Justice League movie, they should have just done it. That would have been Zack Snyder's trilogy, and it would have been the same kind of trilogy, like Christopher Nolan made a trilogy, and it could have been a thing unto itself. It was a mess. Star Trek V was a deeply compromised film. I have read Shatner's original story treatment. I have it around here somewhere. It's called Act of Love. And it's actually pretty good. But Shatner was saddled with this mandate from the studio. While Star Trek 4 is funny, Star Trek 5's got to be funny too, where Shatner actually came up with a pretty good, very introspective story that has a lot to it. Now, his lack of experience as a director and the fact that, let's face it, Shatner doesn't really know much about Star Trek. I'll flat out say it. Why would he? He's an actor playing a part. He's not home reading blueprints. He's not home reading Star Trek novels. If I asked him about The Fate and the Price of the Phoenix by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Colbraith, he'd be like, what the hell is that? I'm like, the books with Omni. He would look at me with the blind. I know this for a fact because I work with him. I directed Shatner. I mean, that was the problem with those films, is that, and Shatner, like you pointed out, he didn't have enough money, and they went with Brand Farron, who they were trying to save money. They had their budget curtailed, and it was problematic. But since you asked the question, I think probably of all of those movies, Justice League and Star Trek V fall short. Because we saw things that came before. We had the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We had other DCEU movies. So we saw what Justice League could have been. Star Trek V, we had 4 previous feature films that are all pretty good. I've talked about how I don't like Star Trek 3 very much, but still, it's a respectable movie. And the motion picture in Star Trek 2 set the tone. I think of all of these, I'm going to go with The Mummy, even though also a film that's at war against itself, because it was trying to set up this universe that didn't yet exist. But there's enough in it to be interesting, even though Alex Kurtzman directed it. So to answer your question in terms of failing to live up to a universe, Star Trek V and Justice League do that. I think The Mummy is the best of those movies for what it is. But The Mummy's still not very good, and it doesn't make me. I don't like that I feel that way. Alan Sachs says a roller coaster would easily fit in the Death Star. That is true. That is absolutely true. I can't argue with that. Oh my God, I can't even, there's no way I can read all these letters today. There's just too many of them. I'm losing my voice here. Well, let's see. I love this. Brian Eng's been hitting me with these little morality letters. Brian Eng is back again. Brian Eng's here's a letter. Brian Eng says, if your commanding officer were a woman, would you go with ma'am or sir? Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I would probably go with what proper protocol was. Like isn't in Britain, I know this from Bodyguard. If you're protecting the prime minister and she's a woman, you say mum, I don't know if ma'am is proper military. Ma'am's proper military. Probably sir. I would go with that, but it would really depend on what is protocol. I wouldn't have a choice. It would depend on who I'm serving with and what I was expected to do. What would be the proper way to address somebody? That's kind of, I think I'd have to say that. Here's a good one. My man Jeffrey Mao is back. Jeff Mao always has good letters to send in. Hi, Rob. On yesterday's show, you were waxing rhapsodically about Martin Scorsese's work on his 1995 film Casino. It got me thinking about the collected works of Mr. Scorsese. I'll start with my general memories and thoughts of his other films and then circle back to what I consider to be his mafia duology masterpiece, Goodfellas and Casino. I have not watched all of Mr. Scorsese's films, as there have been quite a large number of them. I tend to only watch his urban crime and mob movies like Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, the aforementioned duology, and others like The Departed and Shutter Island. Regarding Shutter Island, what a great year for Leonardo DiCaprio, as he had two mind-benders of films alongside Inception. Shutter Island and Inception would make great mind-bending double bill. You'll either need a stiff drink or a visit to a therapist after watching that. Mr. Scorsese has appeared to defy the trend amongst most great artists in their latter works that do not compare in quality with their earlier works. Certainly, his early works like Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and Raging Bull are classics of that great decade where the American filmmaking auteur came to prominence. His recent films, such as Wolf of Wall Street, Silence, and the soon-to-be-released The Irishman, show he has no plans to slow down. His upcoming schedule, according to the IMDb, appears to be just as busy. I would say of his early films, my favorite is Raging Bull by far. Among his films, that is the one I wished I could have seen in the theater. You could feel the atmosphere of the fight scenes just oozing off the screen, especially the fight where Jake wins the title with the long take of him entering the arena. I would challenge anyone who says they don't like to watch black and white films to watch Raging Bull and not be captivated. You know what? Raging Bull and Coppola's Rumblefish are... I've actually watched those back to back. They're amazing, amazing uses of black and white. It's actually quite an unpleasant film in that no one is portrayed in any good light. Neither Jake, his brother, played by Joe Pesci, nor his wife, played by Kathy Moriarty. But damn, is it not amazing to watch. With regard to his mafia duology masterpiece, I'll not say much about Goodfellas that hasn't been said before. Obviously, it is the better film than Casino. Like you said, the first hour, probably the first half of Casino, is mesmerizing. Scorsese is masterful at this kind of storytelling mixed with exposition. You get the alternating narration of De Niro's Ace and Pesci's Nicky describing how Las Vegas worked and how they came in and took over. What lets the film down and makes it come off as the poorer half to Goodfellas is the second half, where it's all a constant downhill for the characters. In this case, I can give the film and Scorsese and his writer, Nicholas Pileggi, a pass in that the events depicted all pretty much happened exactly as they did in real life. I had read FBI agent William Roner's memoirs, of which a portion covered the investigations that led to the arrests portrayed in the film, and they all were pretty accurate, save the names of the real people having been changed. When I watched Casino, I was impressed that they stuck to the facts so closely. Even the deaths of the Santoro brothers, as brutal as it was depicted, was similar to the real deaths. In fact, the film probably held back on the actual savagery of the beatings, despite the violence depicted. I suppose it's fitting that the most violent character in the film, and arguably the most violent character that Pesci has ever played in a career of playing violent characters, died in such a violent manner. I think what makes Casino not as great or as memorable a film as Goodfellas is that it lacks fewer scenes and sequences that have become part of the pop culture zeitgeist. The growing up in the mob montage, the Coppa long take, the how am I funny sequence, the Layla back montage of the post-heist cleanup, the whole day of Henry's bust, and Henry breaking the fourth wall monologue after turning rat all come to mind. Also, I think Scorsese's love for using classic rock songs in his film kind of went a little overboard in Casino. Once I heard him use Whip It, I was thinking, okay, Marty, let's rein it back a little. Also, it's a losing bet that Scorsese won't use at least one Rolling Stone song in The Irishman, and if he uses Street Fighting Man, I'll have to seriously restrain myself from slamming my remote to the floor. The final thing I can think of that brings Casino down is the terrible cut from when Ace gets into his car and then the car explodes from the bomb. You can tell that he wanted to do it as one shot, but obviously he's not going to blow up De Niro or even a stuntman, so it looks like they tried to go with the dummy in the car, but the cut is just too jarring and obvious. I'm looking forward to watching The Irishman, and I'm glad it's on Netflix so I can watch it in parts. Thanks, good luck, and I look forward to hearing... Thanks, not good luck. Thanks, and look forward to hearing your thoughts, Jeff Mao. Well, Jeff, that's a great letter. It's funny. I'm also a big fan of Scorsese's films like, King of Comedy. I loved Color of Money. I never thought Pool could be so exciting, but I love the way he shoots it. I love The Aviator. movies that I don't think get enough love. And Hugo, another beautiful, wonderful movie that doesn't get talked about enough. And of course, The Last Temptation of Christ, I really actually enjoy quite a bit. I love his mafia duology. Goodfellas, I think Goodfellas is so much. You know what the funny thing about Goodfellas is? I think the reason people love Goodfellas so much is that we all, like with Star Trek, somebody wrote, we all wanted to live in the future. John Price said we all wanted to live there. All my life, I wanted to be a gangster. I think secretly in all of us, especially people that love Goodfellas, we all secretly wanted to be gangsters. And Goodfellas looked fun. Yeah, people got hurt. You didn't want to get whacked. But I would have liked to have lived that life for a while. And the end scene where Ray Liotta finally gets taken down, but he's being followed by the helicopter, and he is just gacked to the gills. He snorted so many fatty rails. I have no idea how much blow that guy did in the movie, how much his character was supposed to have done. But not that I would know anything about cocaine-induced paranoia, but if I did, I could tell you that Ray Liotta, that whole scene when he is gacked to the gills on blow, and it's done so well, and it's shot. I mean, look, all those filmmakers that were making movies in the 70s, a lot of people were doing a lot of cocaine. So there is an authenticity to that I love. Goodfellas is just so much fun. Even up to the very end, it's so much fun. Even the last shot, he's just another poor schnook. It's so much fun. Whereas Casino, to me, I think peak Scorsese is the first hour of Casino, because I think it's so much fun. But yes, the degradation, and I'm particularly, it just irks me to no end. It irks me to no end that Sharon Stone, who, between Basic Instinct and the way Sharon Stone looks in Casino, I mean, there's a reason why I have a quarter scale cat. You can't see her, but she's sitting right there. The Blitzway quarter scale Catherine Trammell figure that is right there. I love Sharon Stone. I love her. And but mostly when I fall in love with celebrity women, it's because of the characters. I don't fall in love necessarily with the celebrity. I don't fantasize about celebrities. I love the characters. And Catherine Trammell and her character in Casino, I'm like, I get it. I'm like Robert De Niro in Casino when I'm seeing her, and she's hustling that dude and throws the chips in the air. How great does she look? Even Joe Pesci, there's that scene when him and his wife come out to Vegas for the first time, and Joe Pesci looks at Sharon Stone, and there's that great kind of weird wipe cut that goes in and in close up to her. And he looks at Sharon Stone, and he's like, what have you been doing out here, Ace? Like, where did she come from? Where did this creature from heaven come from? But it bothers me to watch the degradation. But like you said, it's based on a real story. Like, it's based, so it had to end that way. And I really wish, I would have watched 2 hours of Ace Rothstein and Nicky Santoro going to war on the streets of Vegas, and maybe it ended in a detente. But that wasn't what happened. I just wanted to, it bothered me that things went awry because it's so much fun just watching them do Vegas. And my dad was a big Vegas dude. And when I turned 21, my dad took me to Las Vegas for my birthday. He taught me how to play blackjack for weeks, and he took me to all these joints he used to go to in the 60s. My dad was kind of Mr. Vegas, and maybe that's the reason I love Casino. But I just, those two movies are so much fun to watch. And by the way, I would say I also enjoy The Departed too, and I love Jack Nicholson in The Departed, but I can't get over the fact that I've just seen Infernal Affairs. So I keep thinking about the original Hong Kong version. And while I love The Departed, there's things in it that aren't, it's just not as, I don't know. It's a great movie. I love The Departed, but it doesn't hit the heights of Casino and Goodfellas for me. But you're right. And you know what? I'll tell you why the explosion doesn't bother me. I totally get what you're saying. But remember, at the beginning, when you see the explosion twice in the movie, and one is at the beginning of Casino, and it goes into Saul Bass, the great Saul Bass credits, and it's already so stylized, so it doesn't bother me as much because it does go into an opening credit sequence, and then in the end of the movie, when it happens again, when they come back to that scene, you see the flames inside the car and all that. So that doesn't bother me because it's a credit sequence. So for whatever reason, I think the stylization, I give it a pass. But yeah. Man, I love Sharon Stone. Anyway. Yeah, and you know what? Actually, peak Sharon Stone is Total Recall, Basic Instinct, and Casino. I would put up with that for a while. Chris Bravado says, I resaw Balance of Power. I resaw Balance is Power Monday. Sir and Mistress is common even then. Ma'am is current military protocol. Think Gene went with Sir for equality. Not all species kept their testes in the same place. When you say you resaw Balance is Power, are you talking about Balance of Terror, the first season episode with the Romulans? Sir and Mistress is common even then. Yeah, maybe you're talking about something different. Mr. Oh, yes. You said Chris, Mr., not Mistress. Yes, Mr. Yeah, because people call it Mr. Yeah, absolutely. I like getting the real perspective from somebody in the military. You know what? I got to bring this to an end just because I'm tired. So this, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring this Robservations number 244, the show about something. Your host here, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, and the existential Mr. Rogers, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. Thanks you for being here. If you like these shows, please hit like. As Gary from Nerdrotic will tell you, every time you hit like, it helps these smaller channels get more play with YouTube. So if you like these shows, subscribe. I appreciate that. Please, if you want to write me a letter, go to the Burnettwork.net and interact there. We are going to have our first columnist at the Burnettwork. We've already got Willow Talk. I have another columnist, and our column, I will announce that. You know what? I'm not going to announce the name of it yet, but yeah, we're going to have a regular column. Hopefully it'll be the first of many that will be on the Burnettwork with all kinds of varying people from varying places. I'm very excited about having this column. I'm not going to announce the name yet because I don't want anyone to steal it, because I think it's a great name that she came up with. But looking forward to doing that. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham. I found out that he and I, we have the same taste about certain things, which is always good to know. I want to thank Greg Smith up there in Washington State, building houses and building snow speeders. And the Honorable Mayor Mike Bott has been very, very busy. So he's been out of sorts. He's been out of communicado, but apparently he's in a pitched battle for the mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. He has a woman has entered the race, and she's going door to door. She's turning up the heat. And Mike has said he's happy if she wins. He's agreed to help her out. And apparently, there is no political acrimony over in Riverdale, Iowa, which is good to hear. So Mike's been busy with that and busy with family stuff, but he'll be coming back. But keep those letters coming. And again, I just want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. It's good to be here. I will be back tomorrow. I am going to be on the John Campea show again tomorrow. And yes, I do need to, you know what? You're right. I gotta get these things lit up. I got to fill them up. You can't see all the coolness. Can you see Shuri? Shuri is here sitting in the throne of Wakanda. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. You can't even see Black Panther staying there next to Shuri, leaning on and Marlon Brando Jor-El. Not many people have the Hot Toys Marlon Brando Jor-El. This came out when Superman Returns came out. Pretty cool. Yes, but I should light them all up. I have so many figures I've never even opened. It'd be great to have a place where I could do that. But anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. Most of all, thanks for being you. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, have a better day.